Oh, that's embarrassing. Anyhow, Paul Fromm, how are you, sir? I have been looking forward to having you back on this show for so long, and you're finally here, and we get off to a lousy start. I have missed
Oh,
I have missed you and your red ensign.
yeah. And I have my Father Christmas tie on in honor of the season.
Well, today is the fifth day of Christmas, and I don't know if you saw my proposed topic or not, but
No.
I my proposed topic for tonight is, and it may have to carry over because it's a big one. Can Western civilization survive the demise of Christianity? I This is one of my biggest struggles in life. Every element of that shield behind you is a Christian nation.
Yes.
Every part of the monuments and the colonial achievements of what and the artistic achievements and the musical achievements of Western civilization is intimately tied up with Christianity for the past 2,000 years. But the Christian churches have deserted us, and the Christian churches are now part of the conspiracy to destroy the heritage of Michelangelo and Leonardo and Geoffrey Chaucer. Oh, today is not only the fifth day of Christmas, today is also the feast of St. Thomas of Becket, Archbishop of
Yes.
Canterbury. On this day in, I guess it was 1170, the Archbishop of Canterbury was murdered in his own cathedral by agents of King Henry II of England. And he is really the founder of the Independent Church of England, spiritually, anyhow. And as it happens, and her my late mother and her still living personal chaplain were instrumental in having Congress recognize uh, Saint Thomas of Becket as a day important to religious history in the United States.
Oh, well,
Uh,
that's quite an achievement. The governments of both our countries are so pathologically anti-Christian, despite the fact that at least in your country, a fair number of prominent politicians wear their religious fervor on their shirt sleeves. But we live in a very, very anti-Christian age.
we do, and yet the Christian churches seem. I mean, I don't. I think it's the same way in Canada. I haven't been to Canada in ages. And oh, by the way, are you still banned from entering the United States?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, I'm in the process of applying for I made a visa application. They've given me an interview for February the 14th, 2025. I'm going to try to get it. I tried once before to get it expedited. I failed. I'm hoping early in the new year to try again, but I think, frankly, your government's just playing games with me.
Valentine's Day of 2025.
2025, not
Yeah, I get it.
6 weeks from now, but
A year and
uh,
6 weeks from now.
yeah, I guess maybe it would be worth a trip down to Mexico and just uh, slither across the border like all the other
Well, then you
what
could,
do they call migrants? I call them illegals, but
I no longer really engage in the discussion about legal versus illegal immigration because really the big point is it's white, non-white immigration, and do we want massive non-white immigration? And if you don't say that out loud, the whole discussion becomes meaningless, I think.
yes, or it bogs down in logistics or discussions of finance. Well, these silly sanctuary cities that are getting what they wanted uh, are swamped. They need more money. Well, these might indeed be points and issues, but the reality is we're being invaded, Canada and the United States, and by the third world. Well, that's what it's all about.
What's going on in Canada? I haven't talked to you in has it been over a year or almost a year?
Just about a year, February last year.
So what's going on in Canada?
Well, uh, we now are having 1 million newcomers a year. Now we are about we're 40 million people. The U.S. is what, about 360. So we're about a ninth your size, and we're getting 1 million people. Uh, Half of them immigrants from all over the world, but 90% from the third world, and then another 500,000. Many of whom will stay. These are temporary foreign workers, but many are not very temporary. And the other, about 250,000 people on student visas. But that doesn't mean that they have to go home after they've finished their studies. We have a massive, massive housing crisis. We're about 3.5 million homes short, and
Three and a half million homes short
yeah, short
out of a
so
population of how many?
440 million.
40 million. 'Cause, when did Canada? I mean, at one point, Canada was about the same as. I guess that's still about the same as California, right?
I think so. Um, when I was growing up in the 60s, we were 18 million. We've doubled since then. All the vast majority of these people from the third world. But it is simply the politics of replacement. The European founding settler people are being replaced by policy. This isn't by accident, it's by policy. And the current fanatic in power, Justin Trudeau, can't fill the country up fast enough. And even now, even mainline sources I've seen maybe the last 6 months are saying, well, there's a connection between very high levels of immigration and the lack of housing. And housing is really,
Wow.
really, yeah.
Wow, who could do that math and come to that conclusion? I mean, could anyone who had, I bet most people who flunked the fourth grade could actually figure that out. You've got a population of 40 million, 3.5 million housing short, and the population doubled uh, in the past 40 years because uh, that's amazing. I mean, how does he explain it? Your Mr. Trudeau. How does he explain it?
Um, we need immigration to grow the economy. There's allegedly all sorts of jobs that are not that cannot be filled. But we're never told, well, what type of jobs? And we have about a 5.5% unemployment rate. So it's also there's just no Canadian workers uh, 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 to do the work. I think this is largely put out by business. The basic when they say there's a job shortage, what they mean is that there's a shortage of people prepared to do uh, real bad, real grunt work for the minimum wage. The businesses have long used immigration as a source of cheap labor. Uh,
A way of depressing the economy, in other words.
Yeah, and of course, it is cheap labor. In the short term, it's cheap for them, but it's not cheap for the country because these people stay. They're very they earn very little income, so they're not paying much in the way of taxes, if anything, and they become net consumers of the tax dollar. Uh, there's a professor of retired professor emeritus of economics at Simon Fraser University, Herb Grubel. He was for one term a member of parliament, and he did a study 10 years ago, which he updates every year, And he points out that the input of the cohort of immigrants that we've been getting into the tax base, uh, minus the what they take out of the tax base, is a net. Well, now it's a net deficit of well over $40 billion a year. So the cheerleader uh, 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 refrain, we need immigration to grow the economy, is just nonsense. The immigration we've been getting for the last 40 years is a net annual drain on the economy. And that's just looking at it from an economic point of view, which I think is important, but it's not the only point of view. The demographic replacement of the founding settler people uh, is a catastrophe, and is supported by all major federal parties, with the exception of the People's Party of Canada, which is a populist party, but has no elected members. All the
No,
parties that
no,
have,
no members of parliament. You said
no, they're new, relatively new.
what percentage of the vote do they get?
They got 5% of the vote last time around.
5%. Okay, so and you don't have proportional representation there, so
No, no.
they
So
can't even get one.
first past the post system, unless they're a very regional party, the 5% elects nobody.
So it sounds like you might actually do better in life to come down to Mexico and then cross the border.
Yeah. Uh, the system, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The system in the United States is completely broken. But the system in Canada is completely broken. And you don't know whether are we ruled by conspirators or idiots, or both. A very funny thing happened in the Canadian Parliament a couple of months ago. Right after his visit to Washington, the Jewish president of the Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, came to Ottawa, and he's a great buddy of Trudeau's. So they were clapping each other on the back, and Zelensky addressed a joint session of the House of Commons, or the House of Commons and the Senate. So at the beginning of that, the Speaker of the House of Commons introduced some people for a bit of recognition, and one of them was a fellow named Yaroslav Hunka, and he said, "Mr. Hunka is one of my constituents, and he bravely fought the Soviets in the Second World War, and he's a war hero." Well, he got a standing ovation from all the members of Parliament and the Senate, from the gallery, even from Zelensky. A few days later, the Jewish forward said, but, he was
This
a
may this
member of the 14th SS Division, or the Galician Division, and none of the dumbbells. I mean, you wonder how stupid are they? Now, I have no problem with him being honored, uh, but of course, being uh, totally anti-Nazi, our entire political establishment was jumping up and down and tearing out their hair, and blanching, and turning pink with embarrassment. And so the poor speaker had to resign, and they elected some Negro in his place. But yeah, I asked my question: Are we simply led by idiots, or are we led by conspirators, or maybe it's a bit of both? But when the speaker wouldn't know that if he fought the Russians in the Ukraine in from 43 to 45, duh, what army was he in? Now that's just basic history. Well, of course, when you dumb down the education system, uh, when you replace excellence with equity, and that's we're very much tied to DEI, diversion. I mean, so, diversity, equity, inclusion, as I think many of your institutions are. Well, when you begin to implement equity, which means equal results, that way Negroes can score as well as white people, and but you only to accomplish that you have to jigger the system. And speaking of which, I just got a belly laugh out and a half out of what happened with those three university presidents in front of the your congressional committee, and they were being grilled about, well, what calls for genocide against Jews violate your college, your university's behavior code. And they danced and wiggled and said, well, free speech is an important issue, and that's when I laughed. That negress who's the head of or Gay, I think her last name is Gay,
Harvard.
Harvard. Harvard has the worst record of 485 institutions of higher learning in protecting freedom of speech. So the newfound concern about free speech was too precious by half. And I know she's under a lot of pressure to resign, and there's a bit of a rebellion among some of the alumni and the donors. And I thought, but that's what you get for with affirmative action. She's as far as I can tell, an academic of no talent. That now it's come out that her thesis and some of the papers she has written
Plagiarized.
since are what?
Plagiarized.
If not plagiarized, at least she didn't get around to proper citations. That's academic scholarship. That's high school level stuff. How did she become a PhD? Well, well,
Being a
that's what
black
you
woman
get with
helped.
university.
Being a black woman definitely helped. I mean, I have just seen in my. I mean, I still think I'm young. I'm wrong, of course, but in the past 40 years that I've been involved in academia, I have seen Tulane turn from a 95% white institution uh, with maybe 10% of those whites actually being Jewish to 40% Jewish and 40% white and 20% non-white. That's Tulane. Harvard. My department was one of the more conservative departments at Harvard. It was still mostly dominated by WASPs and a few continental Europeans when I was there. And now the university, I was looking at the top members of the class of 2023,
Right.
and there was one white Anglo-Saxon Protestant and one white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male and one white Anglo-Saxon Protestant female in this list of top graduates at what used to be the quintessential WASP university over here. And it's just this all happened in 40 years. I mean, uh, it's astounding the change that has happened, and I mean just the idea that Canada has doubled in population. The United States has almost doubled in population, not quite. It was around 200 and something in 1980, I think, and now up, as you say, up to 360. And I I don't know how people I don't know how people can miss the fact, or maybe just no. But is it possible that the majority of white people really do think we should go extinct?
I would hate to think that that's true. That despite the propaganda that they get, many all young people will get through the public education system and through the churches, and quite often from the mass media. Yeah, we're being led to think that uh, Europeans never did anything of any significance other than enslaving the blacks and holocausting the Jews and raping the environment and dispossessing the native people. That is the standard drumbeat party line, and therefore, if I guess if you imbibe that, then you certainly don't think that we as a people should really prevail. It becomes, well, that's a bit embarrassing. I of course want to live myself, etc. But as for carrying on a tradition, well, no, it's like finding out that your grandmother was a whore and your father was away for long periods of time because he was a child rapist and yeah, but I'm proud of my you know, but that's essentially the head job that's being done to us, partly, but I think maybe even in large measure by the Jewish cultural Marxists, but with a lot of collaboration from WASPs. You know,
Oh, obviously. I mean, tell me about the cafe in the past years. You're the president of Canadian Association for Freedom of Expression, right?
yes.
And how has that been going this year? And are you getting more or less support at this stage?
Well, I would say that the times are changing. There's been a change in perception, in large measure, because of the events of October the 7th. Um, uh, Suddenly, what might be called the left and the pro-Palestinian for the forces are largely left wing. Not, I mean, not entirely. I'm sympathetic to the Palestinians, but largely. Well, now the absolutely infuriated Zionist establishment is whacking out in all directions, uh, 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 trying to punish some who signed petitions, firing a reporter who attended a pro-Palestinian protest and made some statements there. Um, the left is now feeling the wrath of the Zionist censors who've caused us so much grief, and that is that I think is helping to change things. They're now seeing the people that they're now seeing as people who are enemies of free speech, uh, maybe for the first time. And many of these people being persecuted now are no champions of free speech. So they would have been all in favor of, campus codes that would deny a Jared Taylor or even a much more moderate person a venue to speak. So there's quite a shakeup. Another thing that's interesting is there's a recent poll that shows a large number of Canadians are souring on uh, this value of diversity. We like you have been propagandized with diversity is our greatest strength, which to anybody who can think beyond their little toe is bullshit. I always was.
Look at that flag behind you. That's beautiful diversity. That is truly
European
beautiful diversity.
diversity.
Yeah.
And if you really get into deeper into the symbolism, the three joined maple leafs on the bottom of the crest stood for. There are various interpretations. The French, the English, and all the other Europeans who came and built the country. It's a it's a powerful symbol of European diversity. And this country, like America, was European built. Um, uh, but your original question about the can the West survive the demise of Christianity? Uh, I don't have a snappy answer off the top of my head. Certainly, Christianity, with the exception of very traditionalist Catholicism, basically led by rebels like Bishop Williamson, and some very traditional Protestantism. Uh, Mainline Christianity has surrendered to the third world, and is basically I think, accepted his own demise. Your church in Canada is the Anglican Church. Well, they have a demographer um, on staff, and he did a study of the Anglican parishes in Canada a couple of years ago, and the Anglican Church has been in membership free fall for 40 years, and he reckoned that somewhere around 2050, the last Anglican in Canada will die out. Now, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but institutionally, the church is collapsing. And for some reason, somebody subscribed long ago uh, to the Anglican Journal for me, so I got it free, and I forced myself to read it every month. And it is the most unadulterated nonsense. uh, Moaning and groaning about more reconciliation with the native people, concerned about racism. And they had I think, like an anti-racism month, or I guess it was Black History Month, and they had got various Negroes to address them about how the church are being colonialist, and so that makes them even more ashamed of themselves. And when I look at the pictures of church events, there are darn few young people, uh, and well, I understand why. If you are searching for uh, answers to religious questions, what would a church like the Canadian Anglican Church tell you? Well, mostly it's social war, social justice warrior stuff. But and we're bad. We were bad. We were bad to the native people. We were bad because of slavery, even though there was virtually no slavery in Canada. And what slavery there was Indians owning other Indians. Um, well, somebody, an organization that just basically wants to tell you that you're rotten, and even the organization is always apologizing for its faults in the past.
Oh,
Um,
the Archbishop of Canterbury just either yesterday or the day before gave a speech saying that the people of England must do more to atone for their slavery and racism. And I don't know, do you keep up with Simon Webb at all?
Simon,
Simon Webb, History Debunked. Oh,
very
you
okay.
should you should look at him. He's an English podcaster. I admire his work tremendously. Simon
He's been
Webb.
to jail, right?
No, he's not in jail.
No, he's
He's
been to jail.
I don't I don't know
Maybe,
that he has.
maybe I'm thinking of another Simon, but oh, okay,
I don't know anything about his criminal
okay.
past,
It's probably
but
somebody else.
he's got this series called History Debunked, and he's written a whole bunch of books. And his one of his latest podcasts this week was the incredible lengths to which the BBC and other mainstream media go to find racism in England. That they and when they can't find it, they invent it because it's just not there. And he's basically about as racist as anyone gets in England, and he's very mild mannered, but very historically good. You should definitely give him a listen. But I just wonder. I mean, what? One other. I mean, there's so many things we need to talk about because we haven't talked in a long time. But from the Canadian perspective, how do you see the war on Donald Trump? How can you explain why the mainstream media and the establishment is so afraid of him?
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention that, because the Communist Broadcasting Corporation, I mean, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, our nationalized TV and radio, uh, uh, they had on their signature program last night called The Journal. They got people to write in questions to their panel, and one of the questions was from a fellow who said, "What would what would the results be for Canada if and when Donald Trump gets reelected. Well, I won't summarize what all three of them said, but the conservative, supposedly, on the panel, who is about as much a conservative as you're a Rastafarian, um, uh, said it would be a disaster. This is the nightmare that not just politicians in Canada, but the media, uh, people involved with the economy must face. Trump is a would-be dictator. He's out of control and blah blah blah. But uh, yeah, there's a just a visceral hatred of Trump, and I think one of the things is in you may not agree, but um, he he intends, according to his lights, to put America first. He has no use for international organizations like the W the WEF, the WHO, this endless series of gatherings, COP, whatever that means, to moan and groan about the destruction of the environment and dream up more ways to restrict, uh, you know, carbon industries and diminish our lifestyle. Trump will have nothing to do with that, and that just violates the worldview of these people completely. The another thing is that he's unpredictable, and that makes him very upset. And another thing I think that, yeah, and I hear this a lot on CNN, but to a lesser extent, even in our media, they can't believe that after all the things Trump has said, talked about the invasion poisoning the American blood. Adolf Hitler said that. Well, I don't think Adolf Hitler was talking about uh, the gang coming across the Mexican border. But yeah, despite all the, well, he's a Nazi, or he quotes Hitler, and all of this hysteria, it doesn't seem to affect his popularity. Their universe is just not um, uh, unfolding the way it should. All they had to do when they finally realized that Yaroslav Hunka had fought in the 14th SS Division was to scream Nazi, 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 and they went into a complete meltdown.
I'm just
But
curious. Do you know anything about him? Is he okay?
who? Hunka?
Uh,
I actually don't know very little about him. He must be fairly wealthy. He endowed a chair at the in Ukrainian studies at the University of Alberta,
okay.
and when it came out he'd been in the SS division, they gave the money back. Absolutely silly, suicidal buggers.
Wow.
And very few people. Uh, I may have seen only one person in the mainstream media who tried to explain. Well, now look, in 1941, after over 2 decades of Soviet brutality, the Germans
Oh,
invaded uh, the USSR and liberated the Ukraine. And many people looked upon them in that light, the liberators. They were going, and so when the tide began to turn in '43, um, what would a young nationalist Ukrainian do? Uh, well, would he join the Soviet army that had abused and starved to death about 10 million of his fellow countrymen? Well, I guess he could, but he wouldn't be much of a patriot. I don't know if it was an option to sit things out, but if you wanted to fight the communists, what was your option? The German army. Now that I saw that explained only twice. Once the author left it up in the air that he had a difficult choice. The other time was, well, that may have been the choice, but his obligation was to fight the Nazis. Well, what was his obligation to fight the Nazis? They hadn't done anything to him. They hadn't done anything to the Ukraine except liberate them. Well, I'm going to fight them anyway. We have been so we so imbibed um, the Jewish lobby hatred of National Socialism that we're almost silly. I have read material in the mid and late 40s. Our country wasn't as fanatical then, and we were in the middle of a war. And I remember in the 60s, um, I went to school with a number of people whose fathers had been in the German army and of course in the Canadian army, in other armies, and uh, there wasn't the fanaticism about uh, Nazis and the swastika. Uh, well, I saw a kid in grade 8 try to draw a swastika, and a German kid came over and said, "Well, you've got it wrong." He showed him how to do it. Well, the teacher, he didn't get expelled. The teacher didn't keep him in after school, and that's like 15, 16 years after the war. We are more fanatical today. I went to university with a guy. He was a couple of years ahead of me, and he used to wear a big bushy mustache. He was a Ukrainian fellow, and he always wore a black leather, Rommel uh, coat. And I, when I first noticed him, he was a kind of striking figure. I said, "Who's that guy?" "Oh, he's the Führer." "Oh, the Führer." "Oh, yes." I was told, "Let's say hello to him." I said, "Hello, Yuri." "See you, Heil." Now, it was kind of a joke, an act. On the 20th of April, he had his own, because he was a senior student, he had his own bedroom in an old house on campus. And it was a warm um, evening. He had the window up and he had the old gramophone going, playing German marching music. And on the wall was a big swastika. Now, uh, I never heard any of the priests or anybody else criticize him. I think it was just, well, he's got his thing, and that's Yuri. He's the Führer. Today he'd have been expelled. He'd have been, he wouldn't have made it past the second Sieg Heil.
Might have
Uh,
been murdered.
and back then, probably most of the priests had uh, probably older brothers or maybe fathers who fought in the war or been involved in the war, and yet the level of fanaticism and hatred just wasn't there the way it is today.
And I mean, it is hard to explain because I mean, in my experience in my childhood, there was no, none of this hatred or allergic reaction to the memory of Germany. It was like, the a lot of people's parents fought in the war, and they were noble opponents, and they were respected, and they were fighting us, and we were fighting them, and everybody was, uh, a lot. There were a lot of people felt that uh, you could discuss it. You could discuss it extensively, and yeah, I mean,
You know,
even on campus, even on campus, I mean, I there was the possibility in the when George Lincoln Rockwell was active,
right.
there were campus Nazis on a lot of campuses. They might have been a tiny minority, but every campus did support free speech, and imagine George Lincoln Rockwell actually spoke at both Tulane and University of Chicago and UCLA during his career. Of course, he had been a journalist. He had been fairly well respected before he took that turn. But there was none of this fanaticism, and now they treat Trump in as if he were a full blown Nazi. When his daughter's married to a Jewish fellow, she actually converted to Judaism, and his first act in one of his first acts in office was to move the capital from the U.S. embassy, rather, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
which
You know,
which has been a long range goal of the of the ultra Zionists. Yeah, I mean, and yet I still see him labeled as an anti-Semite, Hitlerite, and
No,
so on.
which is totally insane. And I mean, you studied. Oh, you were talking about your college days. You studied, as I recall, with Marshall McLuhan.
Yeah, I was a I didn't appreciate him much when I was in his class, but I have appreciated him much more in his ideas ever since.
Well, it looks like we're out of time, and I apologize, but about the rocky start. But what are you doing New Year's Day?
Depends when.
This time exactly.
Um, I'm having my sons over for supper.
Okay, it's too. It's too. You're tied up at this hour.
Yeah,
All right.
on New Year's Day. Can you set this program to me?
I think I've got to sign off here. This is I'll give you a call in a second. But this is Speak Free Radio, Legal Realism. I had hoped we could have extended. I apologize to everybody for the rocky start. And Happy New Year, everybody. I will be here on New Year's Day.